It is just less than 2 weeks after being slammed by Helene. Florida's Gulf Coast now bracing for impact from Hurricane Milton. You heard Chris talk about that's happening later this week. Milton rapidly growing stronger, fueled by the warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico. People living along Florida's west coast are already filling up sandbags, stacking up on supplies, and boarding up their windows. At least 51 Florida counties are already under a state of emergency. Many of these communities are still dealing with the damage left by Helene.
Meanwhile, restoration efforts are still underway more than a week after Hurricane Helene caused damage in several states. Hundreds of linemen from Kentucky have been boots on the ground since in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And with Hurricane Milton fast approaching Florida's coast, WKYT's Mariah Congito checked in with Kentucky Electric Cooperatives to see what their plan is.
There are more than 160 personnel who have co-op employees. That's in addition to hundreds of contractors who have been released by the co-ops.
Of the 26 electric co-ops in Kentucky, officials say more than half sent crews to devastated sites, primarily in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia.
It's like a military operation. You're trying to assess all the needs, where things are the most critical, and you're going to move troops, linemen around depending upon what that need is.
Joe Arnold with Kentucky Electric Cooperatives says their role is to coordinate the deployment of the state's individual co-ops. He says even with Hurricane Milton barreling toward the Gulf Coast, Kentucky crews will likely stay where they are as to not walk out on North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia.
The concern from a macro sense that we're seeing right now is that Florida co-op crews have been very helpful and part of that team of more than 20 states that have sent crews into North and South Carolina, for instance. But as Florida, those crews have to be called back to help with their own local co-ops. That's going to create a void.
Arnold says some crews that are currently in Kentucky could be called to Florida, but the co-ops still have to keep ample resources here.
You can't send everybody, unfortunately, because you have to take care of the folks who are back home here as well.
Arnold says for those asking what sending our linemen elsewhere does for us, he says it's not only our civic duty, but it gives them real-world training to be better equipped to handle future emergencies here.
These same cooperatives, they came to our aid here in Kentucky after windstorms and ice storms. We know some of these linemen that were working shoulder to shoulder there. This is very personal to them. I think it's been hard on them. I think they're seeing a lot of suffering.
Arnold says when crews here packed up to go, they packed for several weeks. He says they're working up to 15 hours a day and living in tent cities to help reconstruct utility poles and more. Mariah Congito, WKYT.